Hi, I'm Scott Maloney. I'm the Chief Innovator here at the Arrowhead Center at New Mexico State University. In this module, I want to talk a little bit about what the world of research looks like, what your technology looks like, and partnerships look like after that partnership moment. This is the wonderful world we enter into when the technology, your expertise, the future potential of the discovery all coalesce and are partnered now with some outside entity. And like we had talked about in previous modules, maybe that's a company, maybe that's a nonprofit, maybe that's a national lab or research center. It can take many, many different forms. But nonetheless, our technology has been picked up. It's been licensed by an outside party, and now it's off to the races. So what does the world look like in that context? And that's such a rich subject that we might break this into multiple different modules, but I wanted to give a high-level overview of it here to be sure. So let's start with ownership. When somebody licenses a technology, what does that mean for the ownership of that technology? Now, per policy and how the university operates, what we will do is effectively give a license or a right to use in some either exclusive or non-exclusive fashion to the outside party, which means that the overarching patent, the intellectual property, whether it be a trademark, a patent, a copyright, what have you, remains the ownership of the university and by extension you. What we're doing instead is giving someone the right to use that, again, in an exclusive or non-exclusive fashion going forward. There's a number of legal reasons that happens, but it mostly constitutes our ability to maintain ownership of that technology in a productive way, move that technology forward without causing any undue burden for those that would like to use it. Licensing in the world of technology subsequently is a very common and very normal mechanism of moving that technology out and around the world. What does the relationship with that licensing partner look like now that they've licensed that technology? I have a very good friend here at Arrowhead that will very often use relationship analogies, and I think one is appropriate here with respect to what does that relationship with a licensing partner looks like. Well, best practices for a relationship apply here just as much as it does to any other relationship in our lives. Good communication, being transparent in what we're doing, and moving together collectively and with knowledge and unification around one common goal. I know that may sound very warm and fuzzy and fluffy, but the reality is good communication and that transparency and aligning around a common goal really is the core of a lot of technology relationships that we have with those outside partners. So when we talk about the right way to move forward in terms of those relationships, the relationships will be two things. One, very qualitatively, how we work together with that partner. The communications, the expectations, the milestones we talk about, all of these pieces. But maybe more quantitatively, these are also defined by the agreements. In a previous module, we talked a lot about all the different kinds of agreements and terms and all the different pieces that define a relationship. This is why we put those in place. Because now that we're in business with an outside entity, it's helpful to know who's responsible for what. It's helpful to understand how far this relationship goes in terms of licensing the technology. So for example, if we licensed a technology to company X, a large technology company, are they allowed to use that technology in the US, in North America, anywhere in the world? Are they allowed to use it in just some markets, most markets, or all markets? Are they allowed to use it with some customers, different customers, a subset of customers, or all customers? These feel like very qualitative barriers, but believe me, they define more concretely than you might believe. And subsequently, as we think about that relationship, we also think about these defining moments. So now let's talk a little bit about the expectations of the research. Somebody's licensed that technology. As we've just described, they may not own it in the traditional sense, but it certainly is theirs to work with, to use, to turn into a product, and to move forward. So what's the expectations for our research as an institution, you as a PI? Now, again, this is one thing that gets defined early on in the relationship around research expectations, sponsored research, and whose responsibility it is to move that technology forward. But most importantly, and this is something that gets defined early on in the relationship, the ownership of those moved forward pieces of the technology as something incrementally gets added to better the technology or further refine it. Does that by default become a part of the relationship? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but those are things we define up front. So the expectations of future research really do get defined early on in the relationship. Now, a good and healthy relationship, and I would argue that most licensing relationships are, really define those in the broadest sense and to the benefit of both parties. The idea is to move that technology forward. The idea is to give the licensing partner the ability to commercialize something while giving the researcher the ability to continue its line of research and that research program going forward in the most constructive way possible. The expectations of how that manifests does get defined, however, in the research agreements, and that's something Arrowhead obviously will help advocate for on your behalf in these relationships. So what constitutes a good partner in return? Honestly, it's just the other side of the coin we already have talked about. We certainly hope our partners are communicative, transparent, open to what they're trying to work on and where they're hoping it will go, and making us a part of that equation. Now, part of that is defined up front in the form of the agreements, but the other part of it too is the experience of having done a number of these different partnership deals and a number of these licensing deals to help get a feel for the intent of the partner and what the scope of that partnership will look like. I can't stress enough that good communication is key to what we're doing here. Make no mistake, when somebody licenses your technology, whether it be a tiny startup or a large Fortune 500 corporation or a national lab or an NGO, make no mistake, the communication is absolutely critical, and you will be talking with them a great deal. Now, this is good. This is really exciting. It's because they're moving our technology forward, and they need our expertise. They need your expertise as the birthplace of that technology, the inventor, to help understand the right ways for it to move forward. But that does require communications. That requires frequent communications, and it requires honest communications around what does and doesn't work and how we move forward constructively as a team. So one of the things that we try to advise a lot of our faculty, staff, graduate students on going forward is be ready to be an expert for your technology the day after it's licensed, because that expertise is very important for the success of that technology, something we all want in this relationship. A last note on conflict of interest and the movement of consulting positions back and forth. Now, very often, and as I've just described, there is a need for expertise and communication and input after the technology's been licensed. Very often, a company will ask for the PI or the graduate student or the postdoc or whomever the front person is of that technology to come on as a consultant, to come on as an expert, to do all these different pieces. In most respects, that's perfectly fine, and that is defined by your relationship with the university here in the terms of your employment, and there's good guidance there from an HR standpoint. But we want to be very careful around conflicts of interest as well, and those are similarly defined by HR. It is not within the scope of these modules to define that here, nor is it in the scope of these modules to talk about what can and cannot be done as an outside consultant with your time as a PI at this university. But I would encourage you to talk with your department chair, with your supervisor, with HR to make sure that any input that you have going forward on that technology and any relationship that you have with whomever licensed or took an option to that technology fits within the confines of what we do here at the university. Despite all of that, again, my intent is not to make that sound complex or onerous or any of the things that might feel burdensome going forward. This is an exciting moment. This really is an exciting moment. This is our technology out in the world. This is our technology turning into products, and this is our faculty, our PIs, being the best versions of themselves and the experts that we rely on them to be, and to do so at a much more interesting, much higher level than maybe how that technology first started. This is an exciting time. So as we think about those partnerships, as we think about what the world looks like after we've licensed those pieces out, we need to just remember that good partnerships really do transcend lots of different relationships. Communication, transparency, a shared understanding of what our goals are. And Arrowhead is here to help define those for us. Arrowhead is here to help make sure that the vehicles are in place in terms of contracts and agreements so that you don't worry about those pieces and that we can move forward constructively with our outside partners.